Hello and welcome everyone to this very special webinar where we'll be discussing the role of public art today. I'm Jenny Waldman, Director of Art Fund, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Art Fund's members and supporters who join us in the audience today. I'll shortly introduce the panel, but before I do so, I'd just like to take a moment to thank you all for your support for Art Fund, whether that's through your membership of National Art Pass, as a member of our patron scheme, Art Partners, or as someone who's donated toward our work. Thank you. This has been a very challenging year for the UK's museums and galleries, and your support for Art Fund has never been more important. For our part, we've been listening to our museum partners and working hard to help them to withstand the COVID crisis by boosting our funding to support where it's most needed. And hundreds of museums have been turning to our COVID response fund with innovative ideas to adapt their spaces, to reopen safely, to build their resilience for a stronger 2021, exploring new ways to continue to bring their collections and cultural experiences to all of us. Demand for our COVID response funding has been actually unprecedented. We've had 400 applications, more than 400 applications, and so far we've only been able to support 17% of those, and we are determined to do more. So thanks to many of you, we have raised £250,000 for our Together for Museums campaign to support more museums and galleries at this critical moment. So a huge thank you. And for those of you who may not be aware of this campaign, now is a perfect time to join in. This Thursday, we'll be opening out the campaign with a nationwide appeal with some fantastic artist rewards on offer, and every donation will make a huge difference. So I hope that you'll take a look and consider joining us if you haven't already, and it's all going to be on our website from Thursday. So now let's get started. Alongside our museums, galleries and art collections in recent years, Art Fund grants have helped to bring both new and existing works into public spaces. The UK has a long history of art in public spaces, and I'm sure many of you have seen in the press the recent conversations around public art and commemorative statues that unfolded over the summer, in particular, the toppling of the 8-foot-tall statue of 17th century slave trader Edward Colston from its plinth in Bristol. And just in the past week, in a very different place and with a very different subject matter, there's been more controversy over Maggie Hambling's commemorative statue for Mary Wollstonecraft. Today, we've brought together a brilliant panel to dive into the conversation about public art and the role that it plays in society today, the purposes it serves, and whether those should or could be changed. So it's my pleasure to now introduce you to our panel. Please join me, panel. I'm joined now by Clare Lilley, Director of Programme at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, the glorious 500-acre park and galleries, which won Art Fund Museum of the Year in 2014. Clare's responsibilities there include the YSP collection, its amazing programme of temporary exhibitions and projects with UK and international artists, and audience engagement. And she's also curated Frieze Sculpture since 2012 with its annual exhibition of sculpture in Regent's Park. She is an authority on contemporary sculpture and art in the public realm. Thomas J. Price is an artist whose work across sculpture, film and photography has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including solo shows at the National Portrait Gallery, at Yorkshire Sculpture Park, the MAC in Birmingham and the Royal Academy. And since 2005, Thomas has been making figurative sculptures, many of which have been presented in public spaces, including at YSP and on The Line, London's first dedicated artwork, where you can see his new work, a monumental bronze entitled Reaching Out, one of the very few in Britain of Black female subjects. And Yinka Shonibare CBE, an artist whose work explores race, class, colonialism, and cultural identity. His installation, The British Library, was acquired by Tate last year with Art Fund support and is currently on display at Tate Modern when it reopens. And many of you will have seen Yinka's remarkable public sculptures, from Nelson's ship in a bottle on Trafalgar Square's 4th plinth in 2010 to his wind sculptures outside museums in New York, Chicago, Washington, DC, and here in the UK at the Royal Academy Courtyard. Both Thomas and Yinka have worked with Clare on exhibitions and displays of their work in Yorkshire Sculpture Park, so I cannot think of a better trio to bring together to discuss the topic of public art and its meaning today. Welcome, panel. We're going to kick off our discussion in a moment, but before I do so, just a reminder that the audience can get involved too by asking questions using the Q&A box, and I will try to cover as many of them as I can as the discussion unfolds. So if I'm looking to the side of my screen, you'll know why. So Yinka, Clare, Thomas, I'd like to begin by exploring how public art has been significant for each of you in your life and work and career. And Yinka, if I could come to you first. I think your first public sculpture commission was Nelson's Ship in a Bottle, displayed on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square in 2010, and it was subsequently acquired by the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich with an Art Fund grant in 2012. Perhaps the 4th plinth commission was a significant moment for you. It was a really significant moment for all of us who saw it. I wonder if you could tell us more about this work and about what role you envisaged for it. And I think we have some images that will be shown as you talk that will be coming up on screen.
Yes, thanks for having me. Well, that was actually a very significant moment in my career. Prior to doing this work, I was mainly showing within museums and galleries. I wasn't actually reaching the kind of audience I managed to reach at Trafalgar Square. But fundamentally, I've always been interested in pop sculpture. So by that, I mean people like, Clare Lilley, and I wanted to do something that will sort of register the everyday and the general public, but I also wanted to create public sculpture as not only fun, but also as something that's sort of historically relevant and significant. And so when I was invited to Trafalgar Square, I was very happy because, it just seems, the space seems absolutely apt for the things I've been exploring in my work over the years. The whole issue of public art, empire, and that space is particularly significant because of Nelson's column, and also the Battle of Trafalgar and the relationship to Britain's colonial history. But although, that subject, you might say, is a heavy subject on the one hand, but I wanted to think of an accessible way to actually deal with that subject, which is really particular to London as well, and multicultural London.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thomas, shall I move on? No, Yinka, you've got more to say. Please carry on.
Okay. So, and this is Royal Opera House. I was invited to put work on the side of the building. And again, I wanted to do something fun. This is actually my first kind of kinetic public sculpture, in that she kind of dances, she sort of moves slowly. And, again, bringing that thing of, fun, and also, of course, we know the Royal Ballet is at the Royal Opera House. And I also, I'm known for using those, batik fabrics in my work. Generally, sculpture tends to be, particularly in London historically, white, non-inclusive, not very diverse. So I wanted to bring some of that diversity into my public work. And then, again, I made reference to Clare Lilley earlier, and again, just doing that thing, which is, well, actually what I was doing here conceptually was that after doing the Ship in a Bottle in Trafalgar Square, I used sails in the work, and then I started to think about migration, movement through the oceans and wind. And then I started thinking about the idea of actually sculpting something that's actually not there. How could you actually sculpt something you can't see? So this is my attempt to actually sculpt wind. And we know that traditionally, particularly monuments, tend to be about, quite important things and very heavy. And I wanted to do something light. And also materially, I wanted to produce something that's made of a hard material, which is fiberglass, but then make it defy gravity or make it look soft. So formally, I was also doing something there with sculpture. And of course, taking the sculpture off the plinth and putting it on the ground was also something I wanted to do. To bring that pop monumentality to the ground level with us. And so, and of course, Claire gave me the great opportunity at Yorkshire Sculpture Park to try those sculptures out. So thank you, Claire, for the opportunity to do that. And so this is the first one installed. It's still there in London in Howick Place. And that's a permanent installation in Howick Place. And then I did a second generation of those sculptures. And this one was a temporary exhibition by the Art Fund, the other Art Fund in New York, in Central Park. Yeah, and that's it.
Thank you, Yinka. Gosh, there's so much to discuss there about plinths, about audiences, about sculpting what's there, what's not there. But I'm going to move on first to our second panelist, Thomas. I would like to ask you about your first large-scale sculpture shown, I think, in 2013, titled Network. It's a 3-meter tall bronze of a young black male looking at his phone. And I think the work was first presented in London and then moved to Yorkshire Sculpture Park to coincide with your solo display there in 2014. And from there in 2015, it was part of the inauguration of London's Art Walk the Line in the East End. Thomas, could you tell us more about this work and what considerations you make when creating a work for a public place?
Absolutely, and thanks again for having me on part of this panel. It's fantastic to be here, or to hear. This is actually not an image of Network. I should have put one in. But Network is a sculpture of a young man in a body warmer holding what looks like a mobile phone. And he's just gently looking down at his mobile phone, which seems like quite an innocuous stance pose for someone to have. And it's certainly not what we're used to seeing in monumental sculpture. But the story behind the sculpture for me is quite important because it was initially a commission, which was at a 3-foot scale, so much smaller. And at the very last minute, the commission was rejected on the grounds that, well, I later found out on the grounds that the commissioning body were worried that the media would perhaps claim that it was a sculpture of a rioter. Which for me was very concerning because a lot of my practice is about how we perceive people, how we perceive one another, the kind of the realities the realities we construct in our worlds for someone else, for ourselves, and so how we interact with one another. And just to place a sculpture of a young black man and have it seen immediately as criminal was a horrible moment for me. And so, but one of the good things it did was it actually made me think this needs to be really counteracted. And so I basically decided to make a larger version and to go public with this work. So to place it in space, to place it in an unapologetic scale. I think actually Yorkshire Sculpture Park was the first place it was shown. And that was the first time that my work was then placed into a position with an institution that gave it the ratification, gave it the okay, and then people started to look at my work differently. They started to take the time. And so that was a huge moment for me. And so public sculpture for me has been a process of taking my studio practice and gallery practice and placing it into the public realm, a way to interact with people who wouldn't necessarily enter a gallery, to talk to society in a kind of a larger form. and a way to kind of open up questions, to make people talk to one another, to get discussion started around specific things. You know, debate is fine, but it's like I'm obviously trying to concentrate debate around particular subject matters here. So this is a piece that's in currently in Milwaukee, in the United States, which is quite timely given what's been happening there recently. So I didn't actually kind of identify the slides, but.
Oh goodness. So Claire, I mean, both Thomas and Yinka have alluded to the kind of very different audience that we have in an open space, in a public space, to what you might find as people go through the door into a gallery. And I just wonder, as a curator, you've worked with a huge range of international and UK artists, including Yinka and Thomas, through exhibitions and displays at Yorkshire Sculpture Park. Could you talk about your experience of working with artists around public space and around public art, and how that has shaped the way that you approach art and the way that you approach artists?
Yeah. Shall we have a look at some slides? So yeah, with Yorkshire Sculpture Park is, you know, we're not really a public space in the sense of a city or a building that anybody can walk into. But we are a kind of a strange hybrid art museum come public park. And one of the reasons that I've been at Sculpture Park for such a long time, I won't say quite how long, but a long time, over 2 decades, is because it's impossible to go away from somewhere, I find, where people feel so related to the place, where they feel so invested in a place. We don't actually have very many permanent works of art, but I wanted to show this piece by James Turrell, not only because it was an Art Fund commission. It started off as a gift to the nation for the millennium, but as these things do, it took a long time to bring to fruition. So eventually we presented it in 2006. And it's one of Turrell's sky spaces. It's a fairly unusual one in that it's made from an existing structure. This is an 18th century deer shelter, and the area that you can see around it is the deer park. And I wanted to show this because although I've worked with very many artists and in lots and lots of different situations, this was a project which really galvanized so many things, I think for me, but also for the Sculpture Park as a whole, because we realized it had become a kind of a microcosm of what the Sculpture Park stood for, which is a place that's highly accessible. It's physically accessible. There are many different entry points into it. It's kind of psychologically accessible because of people's ideas of what it's going to be and what it's not going to be. So those people who don't feel that they have any relationship to contemporary art or indeed to art at all are sort of seduced into coming into this space. And seduction is a really big part of what we do. And it's an important part of what we do, because for us, it's really important to have built a place with artworks that welcome people in different ways into kind of the heart of the place. And the sky space is a really interesting, meditative, contemplative space. You can see the image on the right. You sit and you watch the sky, and you feel at one with the universe. And with the tipping point for me was I was in this space with a woman who was from South America, an extremely wealthy woman who was a collector who was building her own sky space, and she was kind of going around the world seeing all of the sky spaces. And we went in there, and there was a guy in there who is a farm labourer who I know, who's a guy in his 60s, or was then. And he was out having his lunch, and he basically went there every day to eat or to spend some time. And it was an incredibly moving sort of juncture between two very, very different worlds. And in fact, when we left, she cried. I think partly because of the kind of beauty of the place, but also because of that sense of being linked to somebody in a community. So that's very important. So now we'll go to the next slide. I've cheated because I put 2 slides on each one, which is not really what I'm supposed to do. But again, this Chillida was an important work for me. This is in San Sebastian in northwest Spain. And it's a piece, you know, Chilida's a great, great artist. And this is a work, there are actually 3 parts to this piece. This image only shows 2 of them. And they're kind of like claws that go out into the Atlantic. And to get there, you have to take a journey. And it's a really extraordinary experience to go with hordes of other people in the right weather, tourists, people from Spain, all sorts of different people who kind of come and commune at this place. And so for me, that was also a really important point in my understanding of the possibility of public sculpture, or sculpture in the public realm. And then the image on the right is the Anthony Gormley, Another Place. And this originated as 100 works on the beach between Waterloo and Blundell Sands. People call it Crosby Beach, but it's not really. And I know because I grew up there. This is my beach. I lived 200 yards away from this bit of sea. And now it's 16 works on the beach. But when I grew up going down to Blundell Sands Beach, nobody else went there. I was a 13, 14, 15-year-old, and you wouldn't see anybody for miles or for hours. And now you never go there without seeing somebody. And Anthony has kind of created this place that people come to. And I think if you talk to people there, there's a real sense of the value placed in them by having this sculpture in their community. I particularly wanted to show this work, this particular photograph, because often you see Another Place as the 16 works, all very calm with a lovely, but actually this is where the Mersey hits the Irish Sea. It's a really rough bit of sea. And so there's also this very visceral and physical relationship that you have with the work and that you get from your senses with being with the work in the similar way that you do with the Chilida. So have a look at the next slide. A very different kind of work. And this is on the left, it's a piece by Germa Plensa. It's a project that I curated in San Giorgio Maggiore as part of the Venice Biennale in 2015. And again, this is the basilica is a Palladian basilica. It's an extraordinary building to begin with. It's visited by millions of people every year. But what Germa did in putting this work, is a girl called Irma, in the basilica, is to kind of create a center, a point of stillness, which had real reverberations going through the congregation who went there every day, which by the way is quite a small number of people. The monks, who we got to know very well, who lived there, and the hordes of tourists who came and spent a long, long time, much longer in the basilica than they might otherwise have done. And on the right is another work by Germa that we have at Yorkshire Sculpture Park it's on the south side of the lake. So you come to it from the north and people make this kind of pilgrimage. So this idea of pilgrimage, of journeying, of making a physical effort with your body to get to a certain place for a point of stillness and calm. And the other important thing about Germa's work is these are always girls who have lived in multiple countries, who through migration, sometimes forced economic migration, have found themselves living very different lives to the ones that they were born into. So the girl on the left is the daughter of the guy who owns the Chinese restaurant close to where Germa lives. And she, I think, has lived in 4 countries by the time she was 12, something like that. And so these girls are always of an age where they are just between being a child and adult. And that association, that sense of possibility is a really, really important part in the work. I've probably said too much. I think I've got another slide, but I don't have to talk about it. Oh yes, I do want to talk about it. So this is free sculpture. And again, Regent's Park is an incredibly busy park. It's, something like 3 million people. It's enormous numbers of people go through there on a kind of daily basis. But by placing sculpture in the park, in the English gardens of the Regent's Park, the reason that the Royal Parks want to continue with this project is because they see the way that people interact with the sculpture and enjoy the park for itself. When we placed the cause there in 2017, you can see it became almost like a kind of festival site around it. And of course, this was in the summer. Very popular, very accessible, engaging sculpture by an artist who's got an absolutely massive social media following. And then on the right, something very different, much quieter, a really beautiful piece that we had this October by Lubena Himid called 5 Conversations. It's a piece that she made for the High Line in New York, where it looked absolutely extraordinary. But she said, within this context, in a place where people could walk all around it, where they could walk through it, it actually elicited conversations. And I think, for me, this is one of the wonders of public art. These sculptures become places where there is communication, where people come together, where they have conversations that they simply wouldn't ordinarily have, people from very, very different walks of life. And I think this is one of the really sort of great powers of public art.
Oh, marvellous. Well, you've just perfectly led us on to our next question. We've got a question from the audience that I'll ask later, but I just wanted to catch that moment and to talk about the viewer and the role of public art and its relationship to the public, and engaging in those conversations. Because, as I said in the introduction, over the recent months, the role of public art, including commemorative statues, has come really to the forefront of public consciousness. And in a sense, you know, it's made us look again at the streets of the UK, which are full of public art. Many commemorative statues of victorious white men on plinths, men that most of us have forgotten about, certainly, you know, many of us never knew about, who come perhaps from a time that doesn't connect to the attitudes that we share today. But nonetheless, these figures form the backdrop of our everyday lives. And I want to ask you all, you know, does that matter? Do we just walk past them and not notice them? Is the role of public art to be a history lesson, to commemorate people or events, or is it to connect with the issues and attitudes of today and to engage in that conversation that is absolutely relevant to today? So I'm interested to know what each of you think about that role of public art, given the activity over the recent months. And Thomas, I'm going to start with you, because actually in the middle of all of this, in August, you unveiled your work, Reaching Out, which, as I said before, is I think 9 foot tall. It's your first individual full figure representation of a woman, and one of the very few public sculptures of a Black woman in the UK. For those of you that haven't yet seen it, it's situated in 3 Mills Green near Stratford in East London, part of the Line Public Art Walk. And I just wanted to ask you, in relation to that, what you hope the public reaction to be, and broader than that, what you think public art of those kind of commemorative statues or statuary that is figurative should be in this day and age.
It's a big question. I think, well, I was very excited to have that piece installed there. It's been something that I've been thinking about making, a statue of a large woman for a long time, for a number of years. But within my practice, as I kind of alluded to or pointed out before, I've been kind of really trying to focus in on particular issues within my practice, or particular issues that my practice looks at, which is about the Black body in space. You know, that's probably the simplest way to put it. And very much around the reaction to Black male bodies in space. And I think you know, with the kind of the showcase that Yorkshire Sculpture Park has given me, with, you know, other shows that I've had in the Power Plant in Toronto, I was suddenly in a position where there was enough understanding of my practice for me to start to expand the conversation and almost to step outside of myself as a Black man, and to, you know, really enter into this, you know, this humanist sort of arena more specifically, which I've been talking about. You know, you know, it's important to understand that all these figures, these characters in my work are all fictional. So they're not individuals, they're not portraits. You know, my work critiques portraiture, it critiques monumentalism, it critiques statues. And so for me to see this sort of very believable amalgam character, this woman, just holding her space like the network did. You know, the piece is called Reaching Out. You know, someone put it, you know, the work reaches out and it doesn't look down. And, you know, as Yinka's kind of said in his previous piece, you know, the work is on the ground. So it's amongst us. The scale plays with, you know, the sense of our relationship with the object, but also with the image. And so it's about the approach, how we approach this image, the silhouette of a person, and our expectation of who we expect to see at that scale as we approach, and the scale is revealed to us. So that expectation of who we normally expect to see, and then literally the realization, or to make one conscious, make the viewer conscious of the processes of kind of basically deciphering or creating an identity for the person that they're seeing in front of them. So my hope with that work is that actually, particularly Black women, would feel visible, and that society, people would take note and start to think, well, why have I not seen something like this before? Now, obviously, whilst I was making this work, statues started to get pulled down, monuments started to get pulled down, Confederate statues in the United States. It's funny because I just given an interview for a podcast about that before that happened. And then there was the Edward Colston that came down in Bristol. And obviously then there was another artist's response to that. And, so for me, this was a piece about, it was a continuation of my practice, which has always looked at what it means to be visible and represented, in part of society.
And I've got a question from the audience, Thomas, that kind of relates back to what you were saying earlier about it. So our questioner says, thinking about the reason Thomas's sculpture was originally turned down, that was network, how important is it that public sculpture should challenge us on a social or political level, as well as engage us emotionally?
I mean, for me as an artist and as a human being, it's incredibly important. I think that each public sculpture is an opportunity to engage with a varied audience. It's an opportunity to kind of cut into the issues that might be there today, and to try and reveal them and get people to kind of act on the discoveries. So for me to make the most of opportunities is incredibly important, and that's why I'm always so sort of, it's such a good feeling when I get to put work out in the public, because you never quite know what's going to happen. And for me, in terms of the practice and as a human being, it's like, I am trying to do something with my work to a point. Like, I love to engage with all the art speak and all the nuances of creating an object and obsessing over form and aesthetics. But I utilize that at the moment to try and talk about something in society, to try and get us to look at issues that I think are important. And I'm just one person, so luckily there are other artists looking at other areas. So for me, it's the reaction to the first sculpture network was upsetting. I can't say I was absolutely surprised. It's something I've dealt with before, but I try to make it turn it into an opportunity, into motivation to take the work into places that I perhaps wouldn't have dared to before. Thank
you. Claire, I'm going to come to you and ask you about you mentioned something just before about the Yorkshire Sculpture Park offering a different access, intellectual and emotional access, different access, as well as a sort of physically different access. And we've got a question from the audience as well about whether you think there's a benefit to the viewer and their well-being by being able to experience art and sculpture in outdoor spaces such as Frieze Sculpture and Yorkshire Sculpture Park. So kind of linking that in, I suppose, to my question about the role of public art, is when as an audience looking at art in public spaces, do you think that we have a different kind of emotional reaction to it, a well-being reaction in some spaces, perhaps like in Regent's Park and in Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and a different reaction to it when it's on our streets or in our city squares?
Well, in terms of well-being, yes, it's definite, and we've done quite a lot of research on this. And we've been looking at how people experience, we're in an 18th century landscape in Yorkshire, and a very, very well designed early 19th century landscape in Regent's Park. So obviously you've got a kind of two things coming together, or more than two things, because you've got, in fact, I really wish I'd put them up. I have images of one of Yinka's wind sculpture and Thomas's network, which are in the snow. And so, you're always going to see these works when they're outdoors in very different environments. And I remember years ago getting a letter from somebody saying, I've been coming and looking at your Henry Moores for 10 years and I just couldn't understand why you bothered with them. And then today I got it. And it was to do with light. It was to do with weather. And that just sort of turned something. It made everything make sense. I think sculpture in a city is a really difficult proposition, really difficult. I think, you know, our cities are in danger of becoming, well, they're not just in danger, many are kind of ubiquitous, and anything that kind of makes you stand and look and concentrate is probably going to be a good thing. And I think one of the beautiful things about Yinka's work, the wind sculpture when it was on the edge of Central Park, and, you know, that's a pretty nice area of Manhattan, but it came alive with that wind sculpture. I mean, the scale of it was incredible. It was right for that place. The color, and you saw how people were sort of engaging with it and getting great enjoyment from it. And enjoyment and delight and wonder aren't everything, but they are really important. And I think that's, you know, if I don't mind, you don't mind saying, Tom's work has a political agency, but it's so bloody well made and conceived that it transcends lots and lots of different barriers for people. So I know when people are looking at network at the sculpture park, you don't have to be black to look at the network to get something really powerful from it. And the fact that it's young guys wearing an ordinary puffer jacket, using an iPhone or whatever kind of phone it is, it's that recognition of it being me. And in fact, when we showed the Newman in free sculpture, which are the 3 wonderful aluminium votive heads on the marble bases, I talk to a lot of people when I'm doing free sculpture, and these 2 guys walked in and they were talking and talking and talking, and I went up to them and said, what do you think? And they just said, it's absolutely fantastic. And I said, why is it fantastic? And he said, because it's us. We've never seen us before, you know, and that recognition is massively important for how people relate to the common environment. And these are public places. These are places that are supposed to be for everybody.
Yeah, very well said.
Very well said. Yinka, I'm going to move on to a different sort of public artwork and ask you about the sort of nature of different public artwork and the audience response to them. Referencing your work queuing at the RA for the Royal Academy's 250th anniversary, which was a very unusual public artwork in that it was a design for a Royal Mail stamp, so miniature rather than monumental work, but used by millions of people, all of us, to post our letters during 2018. And I think it was highlighted recently during Black History Month on one of the Royal Mail's specially painted post boxes, which they painted black in honor of Black British people and their successes. And I just wanted to ask you what you're feeling about both the stamp and also the Black Post Boxes project by the Royal Mail, and how they show that different objects can be used to memorialize and celebrate, and that public art form, perhaps the public art comes in many different forms.
Well, yes, I mean, that, you know, that's true. You know, my first public artwork were actually a series of photographs I had on the London Underground, myself dressed as a Victorian dandy. And, you know, that was in the 90s. And that was like, you know, my first public artwork. And that was really, you know, a fun thing to do. But the stamp, well, the experience of the stamp was actually kind of, in a way, a bit scary, because when I was approached to do the stamp, I was then told that the Queen would have to approve of the stamps before, and the Queen actually approves of every stamp, because of course, you know, the Queen's image is going to be on the stamp. And so, you know, and my work essentially is kind of, you know, sometimes can be a bit provocative. And, you know, and I had to, but the stamp was to actually celebrate 250 years of the Royal Academy. And so I had to kind of find a middle ground to find something that sort of speaks of the RA, colorful, exciting, but I managed to sneak some of my political kind of batik fabrics onto the, into the design. So I made a kind of subtle, statement there, but it wasn't necessarily overt because of the context, because, context was very important there. And, the stamp will be seen by many different types of people. So I had to find a way to speak to that audience, but not in a way that will put off the audience. And of course, I didn't want the Queen to tear my stamp down also. So, anyway, so somehow
she's got them in her collection.
yes, so somehow, I guess I found a middle ground, but I like that kind of project because that means everybody can have access to that. And as you know, thousands of those stamps have been printed. So probably my most important public artwork.
Certainly the most ubiquitous, if you think of the number of homes that your public artwork was in during that time, and possibly now as well. I've got a few questions from the audience. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask a few quick fire questions. One is to Thomas and Yinka both, to say, do you feel the need to build a shell to protect yourselves from criticism of your artworks, which are, by the way, amazing, our questioner says. I mean, obviously, with public artworks, you get a huge audience, and you can't anticipate or control what the public reaction will be. How hard is that for you as artists to kind of anticipate what the reaction might be, and to deal with that, to build that shell around yourself?
I mean, I think just recently, even with reaching out, being installed within the context, within the times that we're in, and with all the public sculptures, or the awareness of public sculpture and monuments particularly increasing hugely, it was, and also the debate I had entered into in terms of what happened with the Edward Colston statue, or the space left by the removal. I certainly opened myself up to much criticism. But also, you get a mix. And I think the great and almost addictive thing about the public realm is you don't know what you're going to get in terms of reaction, but you will get real reaction. So it's not augmented by the kind of the contract of entering into a gallery space and rubbing your chin, oh yes, or it's you have put work into someone else's space. When I did free sculpture in 17. A guy was jogging through the park, and he stopped when I was installing the works. He goes, what's going on here? And I told him, he goes, okay, I'm just checking because this is my park. And he carried on. So people, like we've spoken about, really take ownership, and I think they care about the things that enter into their world, so to speak. Criticism is always going to happen, and I think I made a pact with myself that it's worth the price to be able to do these things. You just got to take it.
Yinka, I don't know if any of your work has been criticised, but how do you deal with it, and if your public artwork is criticised?
No, I think actually, criticism is a really good thing. I think that, at least, the work is being acknowledged, and I don't think artists should be worried about that at all. In a way, criticism is a kind of compliment, actually, even if it's negative. And the best conversations I've ever had about art are with London cabbies. I'm particularly about the fourth plinth. They've got something to say about everything. And those conversations are far better than the ones you'd actually have with other artists, and also it kind of makes me feel proud actually that the public are really interested in this stuff. So that's absolutely fine, by me. But, there's, just to take the conversation elsewhere, I think that, within this conversation, we should actually talk about a lot of the public monuments that came down, and the kind of issues around, whether to retain those sculptures or to take them down, because I think that for many Black people in this country, and also in the United States, historically, things haven't been really great for us. And I think to then have all those sculptures around in the world we live in now, it can be quite demoralizing to be seeing that on a daily basis. And I actually want to understand how people feel about that and how they feel about actually, those issues, whether some of those sculptures should be retained, removed, or sent to museums. Because I think it's, there's so many of them around, and we need to think about that legacy. And I imagine that women feel the same, about all this sort of macho, patriarchal men everywhere. And we need to address this.
Well,
to sort of try and make up the numbers, that's quite a tough thing to do without removal of works. I mean, I can only think that you somehow you have to bring a commission together to examine what we have out there, and what impact that has on, or what impact certain statues have on people. But alongside that is kind of a commissioning process of creativity. I think that the Public Monument Fund, they did a survey a couple of years ago where they saw there were 968 public sculptures in Britain, throughout Britain. And of those, 174 were female, but only 80 of them were named women, i.e. the others were caryatids or, whatever, mythological figures. And of the same amount, 21 were Black named people. So this is an awfully big gap to make up. And I think what's really interesting is how serious it is, in the sense that obviously everything around the Colston statue and work around Black Lives Matter is serious, but actually the business of public sculpture is serious. And you see that by how much people care when something is, like when the Paolozzis were apparently nearly ripped out of Tottenham Court Road without any buy or leave. And it took, a lot of people standing up to say, you cannot do that. And when it's almost when sculptures disappear that you see what importance people lay on them.
Yeah. But it's an interesting thing, that, because one of the questions that I was going to ask you all, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is how important permanence is for public artworks. Because I think one of the things that has happened with those works of public art that Yinka mentioned, the statue of Colston and many others, they just seem so inappropriate for our times now. And I'm wondering whether any artist or commissioner could conceive of an artwork or a commission that might be still relevant in 200 years, because it'll be, if you want to, I think, Thomas, you mentioned in an article at one point wanting to generate empathy through your artwork. And I think that, making a connection is one of the things that these public artworks do with an audience who might not otherwise go into a museum or gallery. Is that really possible? If you think about it generation after generation, how important is it that there is permanence in those works?
I personally, I don't think about the permanence side of things. I think about trying to create something authentic and pertinent and relevant to the now. And that tends to have legs and it can go on for a little bit longer. I think the idea of permanence is a position taken by people who are trying to defend things that are already there. So they talk about, these words, tradition, history, let's not erase our past, without realizing that what we're trying to do is construct a future. A future that we can be proud of, a future that we can bring our children up in, and that we can sort of create a better version of what we have now. So this idea of erasing a past for me is a nonsense, really. Who really knew about many of the sculptures in the UK? Who knew who they were? Until people started to really critique and look at what was around us. That perhaps people who were affected, generationally, through generations by the people depicted. But this notion that if you place a work in the public space, it can never be changed, or the idea or understanding of a historical individual, natural individual, must stay concrete? Is it immovable, unchangeable? Is again, I don't understand the non-plasticity of that position. So, you know, my work isn't permanent. It could be somewhere else, but I think we should be open to looking at the things we put into our public realms and what they mean to people. You know, to say, okay, we understand that this individual did horrendous things, perhaps, or things of a different time that we don't agree with now, but you know, it's history. So let's not change it, because a few people will be upset if we remove it. Well, as Yinka said, what about all the people who have to live with the consequences, live with the sort of the implicit sort of acceptance of what that person did? And this kind of, and that, because what that basically does is make people internalize that kind of trauma, to internalize those experiences and say, you know, that's on you now, you deal with it, because we're okay. You know, we've now given it a title. It's history, it's tradition, and I don't think that's acceptable.
So would you propose, you know, retirement for sculpture then?
I think so. The ones that are already there, you know, I would look at them case by case. I've said this before. I look at them case by case. I think some need to be removed. If not, you know,
what would you do? Once you've removed them, what would you do with them?
Yeah. So the ones that are removed, I think there's a portion that could go to museums for contextualization, so that we do not forget. So that, in fact, instead of erasing history, we're actually expanding our knowledge of history, real history, not just one version of it written by people who are riding this wave of power, but all the other layers beneath that current. And some of them, well, you know, there are many, many amazing pieces of work in storage right now. I think some, we could store them. You know, why do these things have to be seen? Yes, they were public, but do they have to remain public? You know, if we're going to kind of be sort of adaptive with how we do things, and we're going to, you know, progress, then we need to really take some action to do that.
I have to say, Tom, when the Colston statue came down, I had a fantasy of it being melted down and you being given the bronze to make something else. I love that idea. I love the idea of all that, you know, this rich material being transformed.
Perhaps we should collaborate, Claire.
Yeah. Well, it's not in my gift. The Bristol's not in my gift. But.
I'm going to just ask a couple of questions from, a comment and a question from our audience. And we've got loads of questions coming in, which is fantastic. Thank you all so much. I'm sorry that we're not going to have time for all of them because the conversation has been so interesting. But here we go. One of them is a comment for Thomas. As a mixed race woman, I'm so excited to see your statue reaching out. You are my hero. So that's great. And a quick fire one from our audience. Does the panel think that that public art is a luxury or a necessity in current times?
You know what, I think, you know, public art has developed from the agora of ancient Greece, and you can look to the you know, Egyptian pharaohs, you can look at all sorts of, but it's not going to go away. And, you know, the reason that we care so much about the Bamiyan Buddha in Bamiyan province in Afghanistan being bombed by the Taliban is not because we're all Buddhists, it's because we care about this statuary, this sculpture that links the past with the present, that has this life that goes through history. And these are, for whatever reasons, it's very difficult for us to articulate this relationship that we have between the art object and ourselves, but it exists and it's there. And I don't think at all that it's a luxury, no.
No, I would agree with that. I don't think it's a luxury. No.
It's definitely, it's a necessity. I think we're social creatures. You know, on a very primal, very deep level, we need to see these objects. We need, you know, objects to gather around almost. You know, like concerts. You know, I'm actually working on stuff that kind of looks at that. But I think definitely it's a necessity to deal with what's happening in the world around us and in our societies. And I think public sculpture has a real role to play in that.
I'm going to ask one final question from the audience, which is, which I think perhaps relates back to Colston and the debate that was going on there. and it's about the sort of the starting point of this, but I think that I'm going to open it up to when sculptures or when public art is initiated, and later down the line. What is the responsibility of commissioning bodies or public authorities to involve the public in decision making, both when public art is commissioned and also decisions about whether public art should remain in the public realm, or whether a particular work of art should remain in the public realm?
Well, I mean, I think there's value in involving the public, but I think that art shouldn't be made by committee, because that could also be, that could be a bit indecisive in terms of creativity. So I think there's a balance there. Perhaps it's a mixture of some specialists and some public consultations.
I mean, I totally agree. I think there's a trust element to public sculpture, and there is a kind of that unwritten sort of, or that contract that their best endeavors made here, and that artists and the committees who commission them are really trying to go for the best thing that they can. They're trying to create the best public artwork, and not everyone's going to agree with it. And I think the committee always gets the worst of every world you can normally. So yeah, I think, but an element of awareness of the public, awareness of that responsibility as an artist you have, as a commissioning body you have, is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Look, I'm afraid this is all we've got time for now. Thank you all to the panel. It feels, I would be happy to go on for another hour, but I don't think we're allowed to take up more of your time. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to those in the audience who shared such great questions. There are more, and I wish we'd been able to keep going and get more of them answered by our brilliant panelists. We're so pleased to be able to bring together our members and supporters like this to highlight the brilliant work of artists and of museums, galleries and public art collections in the UK. And if you're interested in finding out more about how you can help Art Fund to support museums and galleries, there's never been a better time. So please do visit our website, find out more about Together for Museums, or get in touch with our development team. We would love to have you with us on this journey. But finally, can I ask you to share a huge thank you to our wonderful panel for taking the time to speak to us today. Clare Lilley, Yinka Shonibare CBE and Thomas J. Price, thank you so very much for joining us and for your brilliant thoughts and wisdom and conversation. Thank you to everyone, and goodbye.